My dead husband crashed my wedding to his best friend. They planned the whole thing together to test my loyalty. Now they're both begging for forgiveness, but I've moved on. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but here I am, still trying to process the events of the past year. Buckle up, because this is going to be one wild ride. It all started 2 years ago when my husband, let's call him Jack, 34M, went on a business trip to South America. We'd been married for 5 years at that point, and things were good. Not perfect, but good. Jack had always been a bit of an adrenaline junkie, constantly seeking out new adventures. It was one of the things that had attracted me to him in the first place. Our relationship had been a whirlwind from the start. We met at a charity skydiving event. I was there to report on it for the local news, and Jack was one of the instructors. He convinced me to take the plunge, literally, and I fell for him as hard as I fell from that plane. Within 6 months, we were engaged, and a year later, we were married. The night before he left for his trip, we had a big fight. It was stupid, really, something about him forgetting to take out the trash. But it escalated, as these things sometimes do, and we both said things we didn't mean. I accused him of being irresponsible and putting his thrill-seeking before our marriage. He retorted that I was becoming a nagging housewife, nothing like the adventurous woman he'd fallen in love with. He left for his trip without us making up, and I remember feeling a knot in my stomach as I watched him drive away. Little did I know, that knot was about to turn into a chasm that would swallow my entire world. 3 days into his trip, I got the call that would change my life forever. There had been an accident. A whitewater rafting expedition gone wrong. Jack was missing, presumed dead. The authorities told me that the chances of finding him alive were slim to none. I remember dropping the phone, my legs giving out beneath me. Our last conversation played on repeat in my mind, the harsh words, the slamming doors. Was that really how our story was going to end? The next few weeks were a blur of grief, paperwork, and well-meaning friends and family trying to comfort me. Jack's best friend, Mike, 33M, was a rock during this time. He helped me with the funeral arrangements, dealt with the insurance company, and spent countless hours just sitting with me as I cried. Mike and Jack had been friends since college. They were roommates, fraternity brothers, and had even started their first business together, an adventure tourism company that had eventually led to Jack's fateful trip. Mike knew Jack better than anyone, and his grief seemed to mirror my own. As the months passed, Mike and I grew closer. It was innocent at first, just two people sharing their grief over someone they both loved. But gradually, our relationship began to change. I found myself looking forward to his visits, laughing at his jokes, feeling a spark I thought had died with Jack. A year after Jack's disappearance, Mike asked me out on a date. I was hesitant at first, feeling guilty about moving on. But Mike was patient and understanding. He never pushed, always giving me space when I needed it. Jack would want you to be happy, he told me one night as we sat on my porch, watching the stars. He wouldn't want you to mourn forever. Slowly but surely, I fell in love with Mike. He was different from Jack, more grounded, less impulsive. Where Jack had been a raging fire, Mike was a steady flame. I felt safe with him, comfortable in a way I'd never experienced before. When Mike proposed 6 months later, I said yes without hesitation. I felt like I had been given a second chance at happiness, and I was determined to grab it with both hands. Little did I know, this happiness was built on a foundation of lies that was about to come crumbling down around me. The day of my wedding to Mike dawned bright and clear. I remember standing in front of the mirror in my wedding dress, a mix of excitement and nostalgia swirling in my chest. As happy as I was to be marrying Mike, a small part of me couldn't help but think of Jack and the life we had planned together. My best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, fussed around me, adjusting my veil and touching up my makeup. "You look beautiful," she said, her eyes misty. "Mike is one lucky guy." I smiled at her in the mirror. "Thanks, Sarah. I'm the lucky one, really. After Jack. I never thought I'd find love again." Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "Jack would be happy for you, you know. He'd want this for you." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I know. I just wish. I wish he could be here, you know? To see that I'm okay, that I've found happiness again." Little did I know, my wish was about to come true in the most shocking way possible. The ceremony was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, I saw Mike beaming at me, his eyes filled with love and adoration. This was it, I thought. My new beginning. But just as the officiant asked if anyone had any objections to our union, the doors of the church burst open. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I turned, expecting to see a late arrival or maybe someone's misbehaving kid. Instead, I saw a ghost. Jack stood in the doorway, very much alive and looking exactly as he had the day he left for his trip 2 years ago. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. This couldn't be real. Jack was dead. We'd had a funeral. I'd mourned him, for God's sake. "Stop the wedding," Jack shouted, striding down the aisle. "I object." I stood there, frozen in shock, as Jack approached. Mike, to my surprise, didn't look shocked at all. In fact, he looked guilty. "I'm sorry, babe," Jack said when he reached us. "But I couldn't let you marry Mike without knowing the truth." "The truth?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack took a deep breath, his eyes darting between me and Mike. "I never died. The accident was real, but I survived. And I've been alive this whole time." The church erupted in chaos. People were shouting, crying, demanding explanations. My father stepped in front of me protectively, while Sarah grabbed my arm, steadying me as I swayed on my feet. But all I could focus on was Jack's face, so familiar and yet now so foreign to me. The scar on his left eyebrow from a skateboarding accident in college. The slight crook in his nose from a bar fight in his 20s. The dimple in his right cheek that appeared when he smiled. It was all there, exactly as I remembered. "Why?" I whispered, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. "How could you do this?" That's when Mike stepped forward, looking sheepish. "We planned it together," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the commotion in the church. "All of it. The accident, my comforting you, our relationship. It was all a test." I felt like I was going to be sick. The bouquet slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in my ears. "A test? What the hell are you talking about?" Jack had the decency to look ashamed, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I used to find endearing, but now just made me want to scream. I had doubts about your loyalty. I wanted to see what you would do if I was gone. If you'd stay faithful to my memory." "So you faked your own death?" I screeched, my shock turning to rage. "You let me believe you were dead for 2 years just to test me?" Mike jumped in, his words tumbling out in a rush. "We never meant for it to go this far. It was just supposed to be a few months, but then you and I started getting close, and Jack wanted to see how far it would go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The 2 men I had loved and trusted most in the world had conspired to put me through hell, all for some twisted loyalty test. The grief I had experienced, the nights I had spent crying myself to sleep, the guilt I had felt for moving on, it had all been for nothing. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Both of you. Get out of my sight right now before I do something I might regret." They both started to protest, but the look in my eyes must have convinced them I was serious. They slunk out of the church, leaving me standing there in my wedding dress, surrounded by shocked guests and shattered dreams. As the doors closed behind them, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, my white dress pulling around me like a deflated dream. Sarah was at my side in an instant, her arms around me as I began to sob. The life I had carefully rebuilt over the past 2 years had just crumbled to dust. And I was left to pick up the pieces once again. In the days following the disastrous wedding, I felt like I was living in a fog. Friends and family rallied around me, offering support and shouldering the burden of dealing with the practical aftermath, canceling honeymoon reservations, returning gifts, explaining the situation to bewildered guests. I couldn't bring myself to speak to either Jack or Mike. They both tried to reach out, leaving voicemails, sending texts, even camping out on my front porch until my father threatened to call the police. But I couldn't face them. The betrayal was too raw, too all-encompassing. It was Sarah who finally convinced me to see a therapist. "You've been through a trauma," she said gently, holding my hand as I stared blankly at the wall of my bedroom, where I'd been holed up for days. "You need professional help to process this." She was right, of course. The therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, helped me navigate the storm of emotions I was feeling: anger, grief, betrayal, confusion. She helped me understand that what Jack and Mike had done was a form of emotional abuse, that their test was cruel and unjustifiable. "Your feelings are valid," she told me in one session. "What they did was a violation of your trust and your autonomy. You have every right to be angry, to grieve, and to take all the time you need to heal." Slowly, with therapy and the support of my true friends and family, I began to emerge from the fog. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the familiar routines of the newsroom. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of the dogs and cats. 3 months after the wedding I finally felt strong enough to confront Jack and Mike. I agreed to meet them in a public park, with Sarah nearby for support. Seeing them again was like a punch to the gut. Jack, with his familiar rugged good looks and the adventurous glint in his eye that I once found so appealing. Mike, with his steady gaze and the gentle demeanor that had been my rock during my darkest days. Now, they both just looked small and pathetic. "I'm ready to hear your explanations," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But know this, nothing you say will justify what you did. I just need to understand why." Jack spoke first, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I was scared," he admitted. "Our fight before I left. It made me doubt everything. I started wondering if you really loved me, or if you were just settling. The idea of the test came to me when I survived the rafting accident. I thought if I could see how you'd react if I was gone, I'd know for sure." Mike picked up where Jack left off. "I was supposed to just keep an eye on you," report back to Jack. "But then we started getting close, and Jack wanted to see how far it would go." I listened to their excuses, feeling a strange sense of detachment. These men, who I had loved so deeply, suddenly seemed like strangers to me. "Did you ever stop to think about what this would do to me?" I asked, my voice quiet but intense. "Did you consider the pain, the grief, the guilt I would go through? Or was your need to test me more important than my well-being?" They both had the grace to look ashamed. Jack reached out as if to take my hand, but I flinched away. "We're so sorry," Mike said, his eyes pleading. "We never meant for it to go this far. We got caught up in the plan, and before we knew it, things had spiraled out of control." I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "You know what the saddest part is? If you had just talked to me, Jack, if you had shared your doubts and fears, we could have worked through it together. Instead, you chose to put me through hell for 2 years." I stood up, looking down at the two men who had once meant everything to me. "I want you both to understand something. What you did wasn't love. It wasn't friendship. It was cruel, selfish, and abusive. And I deserve better than either of you." As I walked away from Jack and Mike that day, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I realized that I had finally said everything I needed to say to them. I was ready to close this chapter of my life and move forward. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, on my own terms this time. I threw myself into my career, eventually landing a promotion to lead anchor at the news station. I traveled, not to run away from my problems, but to broaden my horizons and rediscover my sense of adventure. I also learned to trust again, slowly but surely. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and even started dating again, though this time, I took things slow, making sure to maintain my independence and sense of self. A year after the disastrous wedding, I received a letter from Jack. He wrote that he was in therapy, working on his issues with trust and control. He asked for forgiveness, but acknowledged that he didn't expect it. Mike sent a similar letter a few weeks later. I appreciated their efforts at amends, but I realized I didn't need their apologies to move on. I had already forgiven them, not for their sake, but for my own. Holding on to anger and resentment was only hurting me. Today, 3 years after the day my dead husband crashed my wedding, I can honestly say I'm happier than I've ever been. I've learned so much about myself, about resilience, and about what real love and trust should look like. To anyone out there who's been through betrayal or heartbreak, know this: it gets better. You are stronger than you know, and you deserve real, honest love. Don't settle for anything less. As for me, I'm excited for the future, whatever it may hold. Because I know now that my happiness doesn't depend on anyone else. It comes from within, and that's something no one can ever take away from me again.